Hi, this is Ben Tafoya, and this is 5 o'clock macro. We took a break on Sunday, so it's now Monday evening, May 4th, 2020. And we've been talking about some of the aspects of the current economic crisis and what we need to do to properly fill the hole that's opened up in the economy as a result of the devastating shutdown of large sectors of our economy during this crisis. Um, to just sort of summarize some of the themes over the last couple of weeks, this crisis is not like the last. The 2007 2009 recession, there was a hole in demand that was caused by the bursting of a housing bubble. That bubble caused a drop in investment, it caused a drop in consumption, and the over financialization of housing um, destabilized the banking sector. So that caused some dislocations in the financial services industries, large commercial banks, as well as investment banks and investment funds and the like, were all endangered because of this bursted bubble. But policymakers could step in and use fiscal policy, traditional tools of tax cuts, increased spending by the federal government, as well as massive interventions by the Federal Reserve to help stabilize the banking sector, and that to some extent worked. So the banks were merged, and the interventions of the Federal Reserve supported many of the larger banks going forward. We passed the Dodd-Frank um, financial regulation law subsequent to that, and there was a slow and inadequate recovery that allocated much of its benefit to the folks who were in the top 1% in income and wealth. So the tools were obvious as to what could be used. The 2020 recession is a global meltdown, so there's like no place that's really protected from this right now. We've seen significant declines in GDP from China, Europe, and the United States. Every economic measure that we see in the United States indicates that this second quarter that we're in now is going to be a record shattering decline. Um, and all of this is a result of the public health requirement that we cut back almost all kinds of services. And many of the manufacturing industries in the United States were also shut down during this period. Some small manufacturing returned to normal. There's um, requirements for food production to stay on track. But basically, we're sitting here with this massive problem of a surplus capacity in services and um, no way to easily reemploy the folks who've lost their jobs in that service sector. So we talked last time about some of the things we can do to fill that gap, but many of the folks who are unemployed as a result of this crisis are workers in service industries, largely low wage workers. So these are folks who work in restaurants, hotels, entertainment venues. These are folks who do face-to-face services such as work in salons or barbershops, folks who work in retail stores. Many of these folks are tipped so that their base salaries don't show up in unemployment statistics as very high because they're tipped workers. But the bottom line is that we have tens of millions of newly unemployed folks and many others, millions more, who are in a precarious position because it's difficult to foresee how their employers are going to make it through this particular crisis. So just today, for instance, we saw the retailer, uh, uh, large retail chain, J. Crew, who also owns Madewell, declared bankruptcy. It's not entirely clear they're going to close, but it's indicative of the challenges that we face. So there are some areas that cry out not just for intervention, but also structural change that helps us address the large inequities that exist in our society, as well as the inequities in how this crisis is impacting our population. Housing is a critical component to this issue. We had already been experiencing large-scale housing crisis in our major cities, in all regions of the country, and as a result, we do not want people to be dislocated or for them to lose their homes, whether it be the apartments they rent or homes that they're paying on a mortgage on, or paying with a paid-off mortgage, paying property tax on. We don't want people to have to move during this crisis. That would be a bad thing. And we don't want folks to take advantage of the crisis to try to dislocate their existing renters and seek evictions. So it would be straightforward to implement rent controls, which would enable folks to be able to count on a certain level of rent throughout this crisis and recession. It should probably be in place for far longer than that, and so that we're prepared for if there's a return to a robust housing market once again. There's a way of addressing the powerlessness of tenants under the current laws. Rent control is something that can be implemented at the state level. It doesn't require federal action, but that would be a good place to have it. But we're also, because of the declining incomes, going to need rent forgiveness. So somehow we need to make the tenants and landlords whole through this process. And where do we want to draw the line? Well, we might want to reimburse small landlords for rent forgiveness, but what do we do in the holdings of larger investment funds and such? These wind up being sort of complex issues, but again, we don't want folks to lose their homes. We should stop evictions and foreclosures at this point. And again, if we are preventing folks from being evicted, then the smaller landlords whose cash flow are suffering, we need to help plug some of that gap for them. Again, it's the circular flow. So we can't just put money in one sector or pull money out of another sector. It has implications throughout the economy. Income support is an important area, and some small payments have already been allocated. There's the $1,200 payment that's moving out into the population, probably too slowly, and it's a small start. But Senator Bernie Sanders and others have offered a bolder vision of $2,000 per month of income support for every person. So this would be a significant infusion of cash into our households, and could solve many of these kinds of problems we've been talking about in the last few sessions. That folks are having crises of employment, they're having crises of debt, they're having crises of housing, and other kinds of services. And this level of support would make it possible for them to carry on a reasonable standard of living. And associated with that are the ongoing issues of food security. because people become unemployed, their budgets drop, and in the current environment, it's very difficult to purchase food. There are kinds of restrictions here in Massachusetts. We restrict the capability of folks coming in and out. I know it's very difficult to get foods delivered from grocery stores, and we need to make arrangements for people to be able to get food and pay for food. And this would include extensive expansion of SNAP benefits, Wheels on Meals, and sort of other ideas that Senator Sanders and others have put forward. Healthcare is a critical area at this time, obviously. We've seen a massive increase in the uninsured as a result of people losing their jobs. People are turning to COBRA, which is the section of the law that allows you to maintain your employer-sponsored health insurance by paying a monthly premium. So basically, you, the worker, are paying what your employer previously paid, plus your payment. It's very expensive for folks, and it's a very inefficient system. Others are turning to Medicaid because their incomes are lower, and some folks are going out in the federal exchanges that were authorized, or state exchanges from the Affordable Care Act, and so they're buying health insurance that way. These systems are very, very stressed right now, and as a result, we're also seeing an increase in uninsured people, and there is going to be an increase in uncompensated care, particularly for the thousands who are seeking medical care related to the COVID-19 virus. Now, the feds have promised that they will be sending money out to the hospitals to make up for that uncompensated care. And states as well as putting programs in place to help hospitals. Here in Massachusetts, for instance, Medicaid claims are going down because people aren't seeking health care for non-COVID illnesses at anywhere near the rate that they were in previous times. So the state has some additional money that they can allocate to help support hospitals through this, because the hospitals are facing a serious challenge in terms of their finances. But this brings to mind again the foolishness of having a health insurance system that's based on people's employment. It limits people's choices in life, and it brings forward all these inefficiencies. It causes all kinds of financial problems that would not be present if we all had the Medicare for All with enhanced Medicaid program. At the very least, people who are losing their jobs now through no fault of their own because of this crisis should be put on some kind of enhanced Medicare program that will allow them to have access to the healthcare services that they need. Basically, what we're talking about here is some structural changes that are necessary and critical. I've given you sort of a small taste of some of these things. When we come back in the future, we'll talk about more. And, listening to politicians talk about this current crisis, I am disturbed somewhat when I hear an analogy of war. But I think the one thing to point out is at the end of the Second World War, the UK is a perfect example. They recognized that everyone contributed to the war effort, and that everyone should benefit from society's growth in the post-war era. And they built a much more robust social safety net than had existed previously, and frankly, is bigger than our own here in the U.S. And even the journals that recognize the market system as being important, like the Financial Times, recognize that our current form of the market system is seriously broken. I just finished listening in on a webinar from Case and Deaton talking about their new study and related to life expectancies in the United States. It's called Deaths of Despair, is the book that they're coming out, and it points to several of these kinds of structural challenges that we have. And finally, it's time to make sure that workers have a voice in the workplace to address both the dangers of the workplace that we see now, as well as their overall economic well-being. It's way past time in the United States. There are some very interesting proposals from Senators Warren, Senator Sanders, and Senator Baldwin to put these kinds of systems in place that have existed in other countries, as well as to make it easier for workers to join labor unions. There have been very many good proposals on this. And so we're going to continue to explore some of these kinds of necessary structural changes that will help the economy and help increase the quality of life for the vast majority in our country. Thank you for being with me today.